I feel like if I don't contain the greeting time, it would just run over. It would just keep going and going, which is a good thing, because as a church family, should not we love one another? We should love one another. We should spend time with one another. We should get to know one another. And if we never talk, the opportunity to know one another is pretty difficult. Hey, if you have your Bibles, Gospel of John, chapter 21, the very last chapter in the Gospel of John. If you're in Acts, just keep turning back, because Gospel of John, chapter 21, and then you're right into the Acts of the Apostles. So as we're looking at this today, we are finishing our series on Christ's love compels us, which is actually the sermon title today. Christ's love compels us. We have talked about how Christ's love reaches wide, how Christ's love rescues us, how Christ's love changes us, and today it is about how Christ's love compels us. I want you to think about compel in this definition. It is to drive or to urge forcefully or irresistibly. Now I want to be real careful here. This is not about saying that Christ's love makes us into puppets. Christ's love just makes us do whatever he pleases or wishes. That is not what the church teaches. That is not the way I understand the scriptures. What I understand is that God respects and works within the choices that we make because God chooses to. And so we have this idea of Christ's love driving us from the inside out, not being led or forced around. So I want to be real clear about that up front. But Christ's love compels us. It pushes us from inside to do something which we may not typically do. There is no forcing. There is no manipulation. Because to force someone or to manipulate someone is not love. Right? If we force someone to do something or we manipulate someone so that they do something, that is not love. At least it is not healthy love. And it is not the kind of love that we read about in the scriptures. But there is love that motivates us to do things that we would never do otherwise. For example, because I love my children, I have changed many dirty diapers. Not as many as my wife would have liked, perhaps, but I have changed many. You know how many diapers I had changed up until that moment? 0. You know how many I plan to change after they're out of diapers? 0, until grandchildren probably, and then, hopefully there's another chance there. But love, it forces us, it draws us to do something that we would not do otherwise. Because of the love that we have for that person, it moves us into action. So with that in mind, let's read the Gospel of John, chapter 21, starting with verse 15. We're going to read 15 to 25, which actually takes us all the way again, but we're really only going to focus on the first half of this passage. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus replied, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who leaned back against Jesus at the supper and said, "Lord, who is going to betray me?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?" This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have enough rooms for the books that would be written. It's kind of a cool statement, by the way. Our real focus this morning is on the dialogue between Jesus and Peter, which happens to be verses 15 through verse 17. Remarkable exchange between Jesus and Peter. Now here is the setup for this. I have envisioned them, they're on the beach setting because this is just after the miraculous catch, where they fish all night and they don't catch anything. Jesus says, throw your net to the other side, and they pull in the haul. And so here they are, they're on the beach, they have finished having breakfast with Jesus, and this dialogue begins to occur. Now this is after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Those of us who have grown up in the church, we know what Peter did as the trial was going on with Jesus. What did he do? He denied him. How many times? 3. And how many times does he say, I love you, Jesus, right here? 3. And so that is our understanding of this passage right here. We take this passage and say, this is just simply to reinstate Peter back into the church. He denied Jesus 3 times, so now he says, I love you, Jesus, 3 times, and he's back in. Nice equal amount, right? There is more to this passage because this passage applies to more people in the world than just Peter. I believe it applies to each and every one of us. And so this morning we're going to look at this. There is a major question here. And Jesus asked it to Peter very pointedly. And I believe he asks us to each one of us. Do you love me? If you're taking notes, write it down. Number 1, do you love me? It's a fair question. It's a question that we ask people all the time. I remember one of the first notes that I passed in class was to a girl, said, do you like me? Didn't want to go quite to love. But do you like me? And it's one of the things that we seek from our parents. We want to know, do they love us? Do they like us? Do they want to be around us? Do they want us around them? Perhaps as we grow older, we stop passing notes. Always a bad thing. I don't know that the note passing thing is the worst thing in the world. Perhaps we stop passing notes, but we still ask the same question, don't we? We look for different answers. We look for different ways to find out if someone loves us. The kids, Allie asks all the time, do you love me, Daddy? And she normally asks that when she's doing something she's not allowed to do. And the response is always, yes, we love you, even if we don't like this particular thing. You are always loved. And we know that Jesus loves us. But it's one of the times in the gospel where the question is turned the other way. And Jesus says, do you love me? What a sharp question. What a very pointed question. And I think if it were only occurring one time in this passage, we would not even really stop to think about it. But Jesus says to Peter, do you love me? Peter says, of course I love you. And what is Jesus' response? When somebody normally says, I love you, what do we say back?
Snap out of it.
Maybe just shorten it to love you, or whatever it may be. Never say thanks. That could be a problem. But normally, when someone says, I love you, we respond with, I love you too. Jesus' response is not, I love you too. Because that is already established well throughout the Gospels. That Jesus loves everyone. But his response to Peter is, feed my lambs. Isn't that odd? If Jen were to say to me, I love you, and I said, great, take care of my dog. It would not carry the same effect, right? She may not be as happy. Now, we read this because we read it in church, right? And we say, oh, we're the sheep, we're the ones he's supposed to take care of. We're the little lambs, he's taking care of us. We'll get to that in a minute. But to say, I love you, and have it responded with, feed my sheep, do you wonder if maybe Peter was scratching his head just a little bit? I would be. If you love me, okay, feed my sheep. Okay. That's not where I saw this going, Jesus. That's not what I saw happening here. And it doesn't just end there, because Jesus repeats the question, do you love me? What's the second answer? Feed my sheep. Almost the same as the first. You have to wonder what Peter was thinking. And if anyone else heard this, what is going on here? Why would Jesus just say, feed my sheep like this? And it happens a third time. We read in the scripture, and I love this, I appreciate this so much, because it just reminds us of the humanness of the disciples. Peter was hurt. Because I've got to be honest with me, if Jen kept asking me, do you love me, do you love me? Part of me would think, she doesn't think I do. She doesn't think that I love her. And that had to be going on in Peter's mind. Why is he asking me this a third time? Does he think I don't love him? And so he responds with, you know all things. You know that I love you. But he was hurt. Imagine the change in tone. The change in the voice. The changes that occur within the voice. The changes in body language. Because by this point, I'm convinced that Jesus had Peter's full attention. How often do we respond with, I love you, we don't even think about it? It just becomes that automated response, I love you. Thank you. I'm so glad that somebody does here. It becomes that automated response. Jesus had Peter's attention. And each time he says, feed my sheep, or some variation of that. Do this for me. What a strange response. Feed my sheep. It's number 2. Feed my sheep. Not exactly what you think of in an I love you conversation. Not the mushy-gushy Hollywood romantic type of love that we picture. When somebody says, I'm confessing my love to you, great, feed my sheep. And yet that is exactly what Jesus says to Peter 3 different times. But feed my sheep is a call to action. It is a call to move. It is a call to be obedient. It is a call to serve. It is a call to put that love into action. Because sometimes our words that we say and the things that we do not match. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever noticed it in yourself? Maybe you said you would do this and you didn't do quite so well with it. And we gloss over that pretty easy, right? We cut ourselves a lot of slack most of the time. But have you ever noticed it in your significant other? Spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend? Maybe they said they loved you, but then you sure didn't feel like it with the way they were acting. We don't always cut so much slack there. Because if we say something, we are expected to have actions that follow through and match that. And so for Jesus to say, feed my sheep, it is a call to action for Peter. If you love me, then get ready to move. Get ready to work, because it's not just going to be about saying I love you. It's not just going to be about saying the right things. It's going to make sure that your actions match your words. Man, is this important, isn't it? Feed my sheep. One of my professors shared, we were talking about this exact passage one day, and one of my professors shared his own personal illustration. He said, I grew up in a home where my parents didn't say I loved you. It's not something my family said. We knew that they did, but they never said it. And he said, I longed for those words. So I decided that when I got married, I would tell my wife and kids every day that I love them. Doesn't that sound really cool? Doesn't that sound like a good idea? And so he said, I'm going down, and he said, every day I told my wife, I love you. And he said, one day we're driving down the road, kids are screaming, things were just not, he said they weren't awful in our marriage, but we were kind of struggling. And I looked over at my wife and said, I love you. She said, I sure wish you'd show it. He said, it dawned on me right then and there, something was wrong. He said, I had been saying it, but she didn't know it. I had been saying I love you, but the actions and the way I was treating her and the way I was helping or not helping with the kids sure didn't convey that message. Love is more than something we say. See, for many of us who have grown up in church, we know to say, I love Jesus. We know to say, I love God. And sometimes if we're feeling very theologically appropriate, we'll say, I love the Holy Spirit. Sometimes we leave the Holy Spirit off there. But we will say, I love Jesus, or I love God. But then when we look at our lives, we don't necessarily live that out very well. We have a great way of saying it, but the follow-through is not always there. This is a huge problem for the church because one of the things that the church should be known by is our likeness to Christ and our love. To say it is one thing, to live it is another. And so this command to feed my sheep really sets on end everything else that I think has become important for the modern day Christian. I know many Christians who are very sincere in their love of Christ, and their main focus is on making sure that they only listen to Christian music, or that they're only watching TV programs that are appropriate for Christians to watch. I grew up knowing that real Christians, they didn't drink, they didn't smoke, they didn't swear, and they didn't hang with people who did. Right? That's what I learned. If you were a real Christian, you didn't do any of those bad things, and you didn't have friends who did any of those bad things. And that, by default, made you a good Christian. But Jesus doesn't tell Peter, if you love me, you'll only read Christian books. He doesn't say, if you love me, then you'll only listen to Christian music. He doesn't say, if you love me, you'll only hang out with Christian friends. He doesn't say, if you love me, then everything you do will be miraculous and recorded for others to write down and see how great you are. He doesn't say, if you love me, you'll go to church every Sunday. Not that I'm opposed to that, by the way. He doesn't say, if you love me, you'll participate in a weekly Bible study. He doesn't say, if you love me, then you'll stand on a street corner all the time preaching about how others are going to hell and you're going to heaven. He doesn't say these things. He says, if you love me, feed my sheep. There is a big difference between that list of stuff and the list of stuff that I knew growing up and feed my sheep, because feed my sheep is finally an action. It is finally where we're putting Christ's love into action and showing others what it means. And it means more than just saying, Christ loves you. Feed my sheep. Right about now, you should be asking the question, who are the sheep? Who are Jesus' sheep?
Yeah, all of us.
You know who the sheep are?
Me.
You and I. But sometimes, we have convinced ourselves that we are the only sheep. And I don't just mean here, I mean every little church group, that every expression of the body of Christ that meets around the world, we seem to think that we are the only sheep that Jesus was talking about. And if we're going to talk about sheep, the passage that we actually used 2 weeks ago comes to mind. It was the parable of the lost sheep. Now the lost sheep got lost, right? That sheep also got stuck. Sheep drifted away. That sheep wasn't with the rest of the fold. That sheep was off on his or her own. Sometimes in the church we have really become convinced that the shepherd stayed with the 99 and was focused on feeding these sheep and didn't worry so much about the one that was lost, or the one that was not within the fold. This idea of feed my sheep, it has to be balanced by the idea of the shepherd going to get the lost sheep. What that means for me is a really big picture of a massive sheep pen. Massive, massive, is it herd or flock? I'm going to go with lots of sheep. How about that? Flock of sheep? Okay. That sounds good to me. All of a sudden, it was just like complete blank. It was gone. It was absolutely gone. And so here we have all of these sheep gathered together, being fed, and the ones who are going off, we're responsible to feed them too. We're not just to say, you know what, you got lost, so sad. We're responsible to show love to them too, to feed them as well. The other part of this that often happens is, well, Pastor, you're our shepherd, you go get them. You're laughing. Maybe you've thought that or said that. I've heard it a number of times. And before I became a pastor, it was definitely what I thought. On this side of the pulpit, or this side of the stand at least, I see things very differently. Our job is not to say, hey, Pastor, you're the shepherd, you go get him. Our job is to actually transition. And this is the transition that Jesus institutes with Peter in this passage. No longer is Peter just a follower. No longer is Peter just a sheep who follows Jesus, and Jesus feeds and takes care of and pampers and teaches and all the stuff that Jesus did with the disciples. Peter is now responsible for other sheep. Well, that's why we have pastors. Well, yes and no. Because it is not just my job to do this. It is your job as well. Because if we are going to say, yes, I love you, Jesus, the response back is feed my sheep. It is not to be countered with, but I'm not a pastor. But I didn't go to Bible college. But I don't have the training. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. That's not really the answer that we give back. Jesus doesn't ask Peter, what do you think about this? He gives him the command that says, if you love me, then you will feed my sheep. And so our third point is from sheep to shepherd and back again, because we don't really just leave the sheep idea, right? We are sheep as we follow, and yet we are called to step into the role of shepherds to feed other sheep. Because if you know the gospel, if you know that Jesus lived, died, and was resurrected so that you could have eternal life with God, you have something to feed others. Isn't that amazing? Maybe you're thinking, up until now, I didn't know I had anything to feed. It doesn't mean that you have to provide a huge buffet. It doesn't mean that you have to get everything right, or your words can't get mumbled up, or you can't say, boy, I need some help here. It means that we are responsible to go and to take care of others as well. And yet, we don't stop being sheep of the Great Shepherd. Because as much as I am a pastor and I am responsible for shepherding this flock, and really, I will be truthful with you, I see my flock as the Meadville area. It's why we do the things that we do. I'm not just your pastor. I am your pastor, and I am thankful to be your pastor. But I really consider myself a pastor of Meadville. And it's why I try to respond in the ways that we do and to do the different projects that we do, because I have sheep to feed outside of this wall. So do you, by the way. But I don't stop being a sheep of Jesus. And neither do you. It puts us in this weird role of we are sheep, yet we are shepherds. We are being ministered to, and we are ministering. We are being loved, and we are loving others. It is why Jesus just doesn't say, I love you too. Because it is not just about us knowing who Jesus is and loving Jesus. It is about letting that love drive us to do something that we would not otherwise do. Because I will promise you, if it was not for my love of God, I would not be here this morning. Do you know why I'm a pastor? It's not because I couldn't get another job. I share that because sometimes that's the thought. I'm a pastor because God kept drawing and calling and leading, and it was such a compulsion in my life that there was nothing else I can do and be fulfilled. That is how Christ's love compels us. Maybe you're sitting there saying, boy, I hope I don't feel compelled in that way. I can understand. But I can tell you that it is better for Christ to compel us to love others than to miss out altogether. I would rather go someplace that is uncomfortable than to have my relationship with Christ be broken. And so when Jesus says to us, "Do you love me?" and we say yes, or if we say yes, the response is feed my sheep. The response is not just go become a better Christian, go to church more often, lose all of your unsaved friends. The response is go feed my sheep. Go rescue that lost sheep. Go become a shepherd. You have something good to share. You have me to share. Some of you are saying, well, I don't see how this fits because only some are called to be pastors, some are called to be evangelists. But I would counter with 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, which calls us the royal priesthood, a priesthood of all believers. Where because we have accepted Christ, we have been moved into a position that we never anticipated, one of priests and ministers, where we minister to others and we feed those around us. If we love Jesus, we are absolutely called to care for his sheep. That does not mean start looking over every valley or under every bush for lost sheep, right? Or stuck sheep. It means look at your friends. Who are the people that you know? Who are the people that you come into contact with on a daily basis? Do they know that Christ loves them? Do they know that you love them? And if you're sitting there saying, but I don't love the people I'm with, that is an area that Christ can help you with as his sheep. And I am convinced that through Christ's power, we can actually love people that we don't necessarily like. Doesn't that seem hard to believe? Sometimes it does to me too. But we can actually love people because Christ loves us so much that we change the way we see them. And we don't see them as people who have harmed us or wronged us or done all of these awful things. We see them as sheep who need a shepherd. We see them as people who need loved, who need fed, who need to know that there is a Christ who loves them. And it's the question I always ask you, where do we go from here? Well, the very first question is, do you love Jesus? We know that he loves you. We have made that case time and time again. And if I haven't made that come see me, I will make it again. You are loved. The question is, do you love Jesus back? Entirely different question. And if you do, then the response is, feed my sheep. And it puts us in this role of sheep and shepherd all at the same time. So where do we go from here? Have that conversation. Imagine that you are with Jesus on the beach, just like Peter was. Put yourself there. Instead of it saying, and Jesus asked Peter, put your name there. Jesus asked Jamie, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Jesus asked Kim, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Jesus asked Brian, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Put your name right there. And if the answer is yes, then prepare to feed the sheep. If your answer is no, then I'd really love to talk about it. Because we're missing out on something great. Something that changes who we are to the core. I never dreamed where Christ's love would compel me to go, and it has been a miraculous journey. The best adventure ride I could have asked for. I wasn't always a big adventure ride fan. I am now. Where do we go from here? It's a conversation for you and Jesus to have. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for your love, which is abundantly clear as we read the scriptures, as we see the lives of others that we know, as we see changes happening in ourselves and see changes happening in people around us and even things that we never dreamed of happening. Father, you love us. And on good days, we say we love you too. Just as Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? And Peter said yes, and the response was, feed my sheep. God, we just know that our response is to feed your sheep as well. God, help us to love your sheep. Help us to go on a search and rescue mission for every lost sheep that we know, for every sheep who is struggling, who is stuck, who is needing help in this moment. And God, give us the words to say. Calm our fears, calm our anxieties, stop the thoughts that would prevent us from actually sharing food with the lost and stuck and hungry sheep. And God, we just pray for right now for every person in our community. God, my heart and prayer is that every person in this town, in this county, in this state, in this world would just know how much you love them and that they would love you as well. God, we know that your love changes hearts, changes lives, changes direction, changes us to the very core. And God, it is your changes that we pray for in this world. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for this time together. Father, help us to be sheep as well as shepherds to those who are lost. Amen. For those of us